Welcome, everyone. This is the 13th annual Murrow Forum. Each year, the Murrow Forum takes on different topics and brings together first-rate panels of print broadcast and internet journalists, politicians, and commentators to explore important contemporary topics. The past decade, we've been fortunate to have on our panels headlined by Ted Koppel, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Chris Matthews, Katy Tur, Brian Williams, Christiane Amanpour, Arianna Huffington, George Stephanopoulos, Anderson Cooper, Lester Holt, and Ed Murrow's son, Casey Murrow, who's here with us today. The Murrow Forum is part of the Distinguished Speaker Series at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. This year's Murrow Forum is sponsored by the Tisch College, along with the Murrow Center for a Digital World and the Department of Film and Media Studies. Tisch College aims to provide all Tufts students with the knowledge and tools for a robust civic life. Welcoming leaders like Katy Tur to campus is part of fulfilling that mission. We think it's significant to hold this event at Tufts because our approach to teaching media and journalism is to do so within the context of a liberal arts education and with a lens on active citizenship and public service, both here and abroad. We believe this is critical to preparing the next generation of leaders for a changing world and to ensure intelligent media consumption and inspiring media production. Hosting this forum at Tufts is also relevant because in 1965, the Murrow Center at Tufts was established as a memorial to a pioneer in journalism whose distinguished reporting and analysis of world news and imaginative leadership of the United States Information Agency set a standard of excellence in the field. As part of this center, Tufts holds Edward R. Murrow's library and large collection of papers, photographs, correspondence, drafts, and broadcast copies of news broadcasts from 1927 to 1965. And now I am pleased to introduce Julie Dobrow, Senior Fellow in Media and Civic Engagement at Tisch College, who will introduce Neal Shapiro and Katy Tur. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Monaco. This year's Murrow Forum is sponsored by the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life as part of our Distinguished Speaker Series. The event is co-sponsored by the Murrow Center for a Digital World at the Fletcher School and by the Film and Media Studies program. On behalf of Tisch College, I'd like to acknowledge some of the special guests here with us today. We're pleased to welcome colleagues from area universities and members of the press, including our own student reporters. And I'm extremely pleased to welcome back Ed and Janet Murrow's son, Casey, his wife, Meredith Wade, and their daughter, Jenna. Their presence at this event is always a highlight of the spring for me. I'd also like to thank the many people who have worked hard for months to pull this event together, especially Jennifer McAndrew, Alberto Medina, and the amazing Jessica Burns from Tisch College, the Tufts University Digital Archives and Collections, my partners at the Fletcher School and at Film and Media Studies for their support, Marianne Paraskevas from the Office of Special Events for her very considerable help, energy, and incredible attention to detail, Jeffrey Rawich and the House staff here at Disler Auditorium, and Jacob Shaw. Jeffrey Stewart has been a partner in this endeavor for many years, and I'm grateful for his thoughts, his energies, and his assistance. And a very special thank you to Jonathan Tisch, who could not be with us here today, but who's done so much over the years to support and shape this event. As President Monaco mentioned, this is our 13th annual Murrow Forum event. We've been privileged to host some of the most well-respected print, broadcast, and digital journalists, as well as politicians from both sides of the aisle, biographers and screenwriters whose work has touched on aspects of Edward Murrow's life and legacies. Murrow was among the most renowned figures in the history of American broadcast journalism. His work on radio and television for CBS reshaped the American media landscape. Today, we still look upon Murrow as the standard bearer for much of journalism. His stellar interviewing skills, his eloquence, and his tenacity continue to inspire new legions of journalists in a digital age of reporting. Now, I'd like to bring out our special guests, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So please join me in welcoming Neal Shapiro and Katy Tur. So Neal Shapiro, who is pinch hitting today for Jonathan Tisch, is the president and CEO of WNET Channel 13 in New York City, the largest public media enterprise in the United States. Reaching 7 million viewers per week, WNET presents the highest quality arts, education, history, news, and public affairs programming on 3 broadcast stations, 13, WLIW 21, and NJTV, as well as digital broadcast stations Create and World. Since joining WNET in 2007, Neal has dramatically increased national and local programming. He's set new fundraising records. He's opened new state-of-the-art studios at Lincoln Center and in Newark, New Jersey. But before making his mark in the world of public media, Neal had a considerable career in the world of news. He served as president of news at NBC, the job he began the week after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Prior to that, he served as executive producer of Dateline NBC, a show that he resurrected and built up to be one of the most awarded television news magazines in history. For his television work, Neal has earned 32 Emmys, 31 Edward R. Murrow Awards, and 3 Columbia DuPont Awards. But beyond all of these awards, one of Neal's greatest distinctions, and one I know of which he is exceedingly proud, is that he's a jumbo. Neal graduated magna cum laude from Tufts in 1980 with degrees in history and political science. He was an editor-in-chief of the Tufts Observer. He's taught journalism at Tufts and at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and lectured at many universities, including MIT and Stanford. Neal also serves on the Tufts Board of Trustees, where he continues to make many valuable contributions to this university in so many ways. Our special guest today, Katy Tur, flashed into our collective consciousness during the presidential campaign in 2016, when she was first assigned as the reporter embedded in then-candidate Trump's unlikely bid for the Republican nomination. Before and since, Katy has done some intrepid reporting, conducted some tenacious interviews, and made some insightful commentaries. Let's take a brief look at some of her career to date.
Good evening and welcome to MTP Daily. I'm Katy Tur in New York, in for Chuck Todd, and welcome to day 200 of the Trump presidency.
Our next guest tonight has been covering Donald Trump since he began his campaign for president back in the summer of 2015. Now she has written this new book, Unbelievable, My Front Row Seat to the Craziest Campaign in American History.
And because you were so close to it, did that make you less surprised than the rest of the media at the outcome of this election?
I was not surprised at all.
Not surprised at all?
No. And Donald Trump, even though he isn't a perfect messenger, he was a perfect messenger because he was imperfect.
And you mentioned sort of the negative attitudes toward the media. Donald Trump did as much to stoke that as anyone.
There's something happening. They're not reporting it. Katy, you're not reporting it, Katy. But there's something happening, Katy.
She's back there. Little Katy. She's back there. What a lie it was. No, what a lie. Katy Tur.
It's the person, Katy Tur. She knows nothing about my campaign. She said, things about my campaign like she's an expert. We don't even let her in. We don't talk to her. We don't let people talk to her because she's not a very good reporter.
But actually, Katy Tur was so great. I just saw her back there. I gave her a big kiss.
Really?
It was fantastic.
Okay.
The now president of the United States is obsessed with you. He might be in love with you. I don't know.
I don't know.
You seem so flattered.
Well, listen, I was the first network news reporter to cover him, to take his presidential campaign seriously. And he thought, in the first interview that we did, I'm sure he thought that he was going to get a very friendly, easy interview. I wasn't a political person. I don't know, I'm 5'2", I'm relatively young, and I don't know what he was thinking. But I didn't back down, and I kept holding up the facts to what he was saying. He didn't often line up with the facts, and he couldn't intimidate me, and he couldn't push me around. Well, I do have the height of a rhinoceros, so that helps.
Because we're not driven by a government force.
Secretary, there have been investigations. There have been studies on this, a number of them, and nobody has found any widespread instances of voter fraud. In fact, there was a loyal... Hold on, let me finish what I'm saying. Let me finish what I'm saying. No.
Let me stop.
This is not your show, sir.
Let me stop you.
I'm going to finish what I'm saying. If you're not going to... Please stop talking.
Let me stop you right there.
Please stop, just for 1 second, so I can just... Let me ask my question, and then you can answer it. Stop for a second.
All right, I'll answer your question.
A study done by...
the implication.
That's a fair argument to say people knew about this and voted for him anyway. Fine. What about the argument that legal analysts have?
We get a little bit of a fist bump there.
No, I'm not doing fist bump.
I can't even get
what
the fist bump on.
What about the argument that legal analysts have?
I'm feeling so good. Wait, I can't even listen right now. I'm feeling so good about that, but go ahead.
He said the supplies are there. The drivers just need to get on the road. They need to get driving again. That seems to be glossing over the fact that many of those drivers, didn't have access to gasoline for their trucks or couldn't make it past roads that were blocked. People that wanted to get back in their cars, wanted to get back to work, wanted to get back to the effort, but did not have the gasoline or fuel to do it. My take? He's not going to apologize. He's not going to change. I'm not saying you have to accept it or condone it, but it's clearly going to keep happening. As I told Kristen, we're going to get to all that stuff later in the hour and all the other things. But we're talking a little bit about Stormy, though.
No.
In the dirtiest part of a storm, not only is there heavy wind, rain, and balls of ice being hurled from the sky, this operation is being done at night, despite original plans.
Whoa.
It is getting really bad out there. We're feeling at least golf ball size hail on the windows, a really loud crack on all the windows, scaring everybody, at least in the car. Visibility right now is only 20 feet in front of us. It is almost zero. You start to realize when you look around you can't see anything outside, why they don't want these cars deployed at night. But bouncing around the room, it can be a little hard to tell. It's like an asteroid crashed and nothing burned. Each morning I wake up with clouds around my head and listen, Washington, I've got a feeling you know what you did. But it's okay. If life were easy and not so fast, I wouldn't think about the past. So take heed, everyone, and your pet cat. Get back on the train. Look into the eyes of everyone you meet. Try not to step on your best friend's feet. And a word of advice, toss away stuff you don't need in the end. Keep what's important and know who's your friend.
So, Katy, you are the youngest person we have ever welcomed to the stage as our annual Murrow Forum speaker. Last year, you received the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism. I suspect this is only the first of what will be a string of prestigious awards for your work. But we here at Tufts are honored to welcome you today, not only because of your achievements, but also because your work has demonstrated the intelligence, the compassion, and the commitment to journalism as a form of public service that we try to impart to our students. So on behalf of the Tisch College of Civic Life and Tufts University, it's my pleasure to welcome you to campus today.
So I want to begin with a confession. I read Unbelievable in one sitting. I've covered a campaign a little bit myself. I've read every book I can find about covering campaigns, and this is the best book ever. I really recommend it. You will feel like you're going to feel like you're in the campaign. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to go back a little bit earlier and talk about how you first got into this business, because I see a lot of students out there, and at one point in your life, when you entered college, you might have been Dr. Katy Tur, right? And then you might have been a philosopher, and you might have been an artist, but at the end of the day, you ended up as a journalist. Tell us a little bit how you got there and what made you realize that journalism was what spoke to your soul.
First of all, that storm chaser clip, you had to really dig deep for that one. The camera is literally right here up my nose. Yeah, you know, my parents were journalists. They were pretty notable journalists in Los Angeles. They covered the fires and shootings, the riots in LA. They made a name for themselves. They were helicopter journalists. And I didn't want to do it. I mean, I had no desire to follow in their footsteps. My dad would, we'd be driving down the road, and he would say, Katy, do a live report about what's going on around you. And when I was 4, it was fun, and when I was 14, I wanted to strangle him. And it ended badly for them, ultimately. The news can rip you apart. And I didn't want to follow in their footsteps. So I went to college, and I started in a painting degree. I was a painter. It was great. And then I really missed words. So I became a philosophy major. And then I had a lot of words in my life. And I thought, I'll do philosophy, but I'll do some pre-med classes because I'm fascinated by cardiology. And I'd love to be a doctor. And I took chemistry. I did really well in biology. I took chemistry, and I got, I think, the lowest grade you can get. Without failing. And I realized, I don't think I can do years of chemistry. They've weeded me out. I'll be a lawyer. Don't worry, Mom and Dad, this philosophy degree will go to good use. And my senior year, I was driving back to college from home. I lived in Los Angeles. I went to UC Santa Barbara. It's about a 2-hour drive. We're driving up California, oh my God, how am I forgetting this?
Pacific Coast Highway?
Thank you, Pacific Coast Highway. Gosh, I have been back east for too long. Pacific Coast Highway, and we get to Malibu. I'm with my college boyfriend, and there's a fire in Malibu. There's always a fire in Malibu. And I wanted to see it. I just really wanted to see it. And I drove up to the police line, and I pulled out a press pass, a fake press pass that my dad had made me. It was my grandmother's press pass, and she'd passed, so he just laminated my face over her face. It was very obviously a fake, and I pulled it out and I handed it to the sheriff, and I said, my crew's right behind me, but I gotta get up to the fire. And he looked at me very suspicious, and I'm 95% sure that he knew I was lying. But he let me through. And my college boyfriend looked at me and said, I've never seen you more confident than when you were lying to that officer. And I thought, and I wonder if he knows that I quote him like that. But I thought right after that, I should get into journalism. I should maybe try to resurrect LA News Service, my parents' business. They had this library full of video. Maybe I want to be a field producer. And then I got into it, and I realized that field producers and local news didn't really exist any longer. And so I became a reporter. And I think it's the best decision I ever made. And I like to think that I found my own way to it. But then I have to consider how my mom got to it, and she was a painting major, and then she was a philosophy major, and then she fell headfirst into news. So it's something of a pattern.
So you, as we saw, you kind of a meteoric rise with a stop of the Weather Channel, kind of through local news. You get to NBC, to local station, to the network, and you find yourself as a foreign correspondent. What Edward R. Murrow once said was the best job ever. And then you get this call to kind of do what you think is going to be kind of a brief tour of a campaign. If you knew how long it would have been, would you be willing to give up that foreign correspondent job?
No. I think if you had told me in June of 2015 that I wasn't just going back to say hi to people, that I was going back for 510 days on the road. But don't worry, at the end it'll all be great. You'll have this, that, and the other. I think I would have said, no, you're crazy. I'm not doing that. I'm staying here. Why would I leave? I have wine at lunch. I traveled to Rome on the company dime. Not just that, I go to Surabaya, Indonesia. Who goes to Surabaya, Indonesia? I went to Banda Aceh, Indonesia. Nobody goes to Banda Aceh, Indonesia. I've got an assignment in Japan that I'm dying to go to. I have all of these plans. I was going to be there for a long time. I planned on putting down roots. I was going to be a foreign correspondent because, as Edward R. Murrow said, it is the best job in TV news. It's not quite what it was, but it is still one of the best jobs. I mean, you become a student of the world. Am I happy that I did it now, having been through this? 100%. It was the right move. I'm super pleased. My life has taken off in ways that I could have never imagined. And if there's any story to be on right now, love him or hate him, terrified by him or energized by him, this is the story to be on. It's captivating not just America, it's captivating the world. People can't get enough of it because they can't make sense of it. I want to be the person telling that story.
And we'll talk more about him. But let's just talk about what it's like to be a campaign reporter. I think, I did it for a week, and it was the longest month of my life. And I thought, so I just want you to paint a picture for people of what the schedule's like, what it's like to be on the campaign day after day.
So the book gives a good picture of this. It really brings you into what it's like to be on the road. You have to surrender completely to it. You can't make any plans. If you make plans, you're going to break them and you're going to be miserable. So your whole mind has to go into, this is what is happening right now. I will worry what's happening next when that happens. Wake up if you're lucky, you wake up at 6:30. Most days you're waking up at 5 or 5:30. And you are either doing the Today Show, which is at 7 a.m., and you're getting on a plane. Or you're getting on a plane. And that plane ride will take you to Atlanta, and then you will go somewhere else. Everything goes to Atlanta. And you'll get down, you'll land, and you will get in a car, and you will race to the location, to wherever the rally is, and you will do live shots from the moment you get there until probably 11 o'clock at night. So it can be like, oh, you got there at 10 a.m., great. You're on TV until 11 p.m. Oh, you got there at 7 a.m. Oh, you're on TV until 11 p.m. Whatever it is. And in that time, you're on every single hour. You are in the process also interviewing people that are going into the rally, trying to get their opinion on the day's political news or why they like the candidate they're going to see. You are also on the phone making calls to people you know in the campaign, sources you know in the political party, and the opposing political party. You are on the phone with your bosses all day long, explaining what you're doing. You're fighting your way into a show on the morning exchange with all of the other correspondents who are fighting to keep you off the show and for them to get on the show. The show being nightly news. And then if you're in nightly news, you write a nightly news script, you present it at 2:30, you're told the script is terrible, you rewrite it again. You get it in, you track it, you start editing, and at 5:10, the show's at 6:30, at 5:10, Donald Trump will tweet something, and you will start all over again. And then you will get on the air, and Lester will introduce you, and you'll give your report, and you'll sit down, and then you'll wait for anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how behind Donald Trump is, or any candidate. And they'll get there and you'll watch their rally for the next 2 hours. And then you'll do another live shot, and then you'll pack up, you'll go back to the hotel, you'll get there around midnight, 1 a.m., maybe you'll get some dinner, maybe you'll get a couple drinks to help you go to sleep, and you're on your phone the whole time, and because Donald Trump is still tweeting, and then you're up again at 5 in the morning, and you're doing it all over again for 510 days.
So there's
weekends too.
There's a little like Groundhog Day in the sense, I guess we'll get to Trump in a minute because he was an unusual candidate. But I guess even with him, you must have heard, you feel like you're going to the same rally, hearing the same words. Do you feel like sometimes I'm just repeating the same day over and over?
I mean, any candidate you cover is going to be like that. And some are worse than others. Some will literally come out and give the same exact stump speech, word for word, every time. Marco Rubio would give the same stump speech every time and then give the same speech at debates, which she got called out for by Chris Christie pretty memorably. It is. You're on a hamster wheel. It's very monotonous. I mean, Groundhog Day is the perfect analogy. It's just the same thing over and over again, and you're in these faceless, small-ish towns. You're at the same Hampton Inn every night. You're eating at the same whatever non-distinctive chain restaurant, Panera Bread, every single day. And you're on the same flights. I mean, and you're seeing the same people. It is. It's crazy.
And to what degree can you maintain a personal life while you're doing all of that?
It's very difficult. I started this campaign with a French boyfriend. And when I told him I was going to follow Donald Trump for a little while, he said, "But Katy, this is not what you do. You're a foreign correspondent." My French accent's getting bad. This is not how things happen. You need to come back home. And I said, yeah, no, sorry, I'm not coming back home. So that tanked that relationship. It tanks most relationships. I got lucky though. I met my husband after that in the makeup room at MSNBC, and by a sheer stroke of luck, MSNBC started sending him on the campaign trail, and he was covering the voters. So he would, God bless him, would drive across an entire state in the middle of the night to come see me for a few hours. And we were able to keep our relationship alive, but it's really hard, and a lot of marriages die, boyfriends and girlfriends go by the wayside, friendships are really hard to maintain. I will say, I've got a personal phone, a 310 number that I refuse to give up because nobody's got a 310 number any longer, and I had to turn it off. In the 6 months in, I turned it off because I would get text messages from my friends or phone calls from family or people that I wanted to talk to, but I didn't have time to talk to them. And the guilt was so excruciating that I just had to turn the phone off. I couldn't deal with it any longer. I missed my friend's entire pregnancy. From day one to the birth, I missed all of it. One of my best friend's mother died, and she was like a mother to me. I missed the funeral. I mean, you don't have a life. You have to put everything on hold. It's a big sacrifice.
So I want to talk now about candidate Donald Trump. And we saw in the clip that I know he singled out lots of reporters, but he singled out you more than others. And I wonder how it feels in a crowd which is huge and energized to hear him call you out and to hear the crowd pick up on that and turn around and look at you. And I know you never lost it on the air, but how did you find that strength, and how did it feel to experience, which was really a phenomenon, really?
Listen, I mean, this is exemplified by what I was just talking about, the sacrifice you make. You make that sacrifice because this job is really important. Informing people about the election, about their candidates, how they should vote, giving them the tools to make the best decision they can make personally, is one of the most important jobs we have in our democracy. Period, end of story. It is crucial. And so when a candidate goes after me, that's what comes to mind. This job is crucial. This job is more important than Donald Trump's petty grievance. It's more important than me feeling uncomfortable right now. I don't care. I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to continue doing my job. And if I let him get under my skin, it's going to be so much worse. You know, it's like dealing with a bully at school. If you show weakness, they're just going to come at you harder. And the same thing happens in the room. I mean, if you show the crowd of 5,000, 10,000 people, whatever it is, that you're nervous or scared, they will scream louder at you, and they will wait for you to go on the air, and they'll try to rattle you out of your concentration, or they'll wait for the candidate to leave, and they'll try to, bang on the bicycle fences and just make you, just intimidate you. So my strategy, no matter what I was feeling inside, was to, whenever Donald Trump would do that, was just to look at the crowd, smile, and wave. And it was really effective, because if they didn't see me bothered by it, or if they thought that I was taking it as a joke, it calmed them down. It helped.
And how did, when he saw you weren't intimidated, how did he react?
Oh, he just got angrier and more frustrated.
I think we've seen that actually in other venues.
Well, he kept trying to get, and you know what this is like because you were in this position. He would call the president of NBC News, and he would say, you need to put a different reporter on this campaign. Corey Lewandowski would call Chuck Todd all the time to complain about how terrible I was and to demand that NBC News put another reporter on it. And Chuck would say, by asking that, you have ensured that we will never put another reporter on this. So it helped. I mean, they would rattle their cages, and at one point, Trump said he was boycotting the network until I apologized for accurate reporting, which I'm not going to apologize for. So he wouldn't do Meet the Press or the Today Show or Nightly News. He would still go on Morning Joe because he could call in, presumably in his pajamas. But he wasn't going to do the network until I told him I'm sorry.
Which is, I think, the big fear everybody has: we'll lose access. But NBC stood by you, and at the end of the day, he gave up.
NBC stood by me. I never apologized. We had a phone call where he's, and I'm sure you can tell this now by watching him in the White House. he likes confrontation from afar. So he'll tweet at somebody and he'll insult them over Twitter as long as he's not face to face. He can't fire his cabinet secretaries in person. He doesn't like confrontation. So when I got on the phone with him, it wasn't angry. He immediately was acting as if he was my friend. Hey, Katy, how are you? What's going on? What do you think of my I mean, it was mostly about him, it wasn't about me. What do you think of my chances? Do you think I've got a real shot? What about Ben Carson? I mean, he wanted to pepper me for my opinion of his campaign. And at one point I had to say, listen, I know you're very busy, so let's get to the point of the conversation, which is I know you're unhappy with the reporting that I did. What you see is unfair reporting. I got to tell you that here is what happened, and you're in a very serious position. You're the front runner. You have a real shot of winning. You are going to be treated. You're not going to be treated with kid gloves, and you should take that as a compliment, because you're in the position that you're in, you're going to get harder coverage. Harder coverage means people are taking you seriously. He seemed to be okay with that. At the end of the conversation, he said, I really like you, Katy, let's be friends. And he hung up. I never apologized. He went back on NBC News, and a week later, he was joking about killing journalists. So we didn't become friends.
The whole notion of fake news, which the candidate and now president has championed, what does that mean for reporters? How do reporters deal with the notion that not only something not true, but he repeats it over and over again? As a journalist, how do you deal with that? We
were talking about this earlier, and we all talk about this. This is an ongoing conversation we have in our newsrooms every day, because it's hard to figure out at what point does it become futile, or does it detract from covering other news that potentially is more important. If we are constantly forced to say, this is not true because he repeats it over and over and over again. We have yet to find that perfect balance. I'm not sure we ever will. I think we need to focus on his actions as much as we can, as opposed to what his rants on Twitter. Show that he might be going out and screaming about Amazon and Jeff Bezos, or he might be talking up Sinclair and trying to tear down NBC and ABC, or whatever he's doing on Twitter. Let's look at what he's actually doing in reality. Amazon's Amazon still. There's no legislation being forced from any of his Twitter rants. If he's talking about tariffs, so far all we've seen is tweets on tariffs. We haven't seen actual policy there yet. That hasn't been enacted, so maybe we should wait till that actually happens. But then he's tweeting about Syria today. And, do we take it really seriously when he's talking and threatening Putin, and how much do we react to that? Because after all, it's the president of the United States, and even words can move markets. Words can create reactions overseas. You never know. So if you have a good idea of how to deal with it, Neal, please tell me, because I think we're struggling with it every day.
And I do think you make an interesting point about providing the context. As a journalist, on the other hand, when the president says something, it's news. So when he tweets something, it's news.
Yeah.
And I think you also make a very good point. How much context do you apply to every bit? And what do you think your viewers, do you think your executives would worry that if we get away from the running story and we do some deeper dives into it, so we'll get off the big rant of the day and we'll do a longer, deep review, will we lose people to CNN or somebody else?
I think that's a concern. And the reality of our business is we rely on viewers. I mean, to sustain our business model is not cheap. And that's because it costs a lot of money to send people around the world, to send that equipment around the world, to broadcast back, to maintain a newsroom in 30 Rock at New York, to maintain bureaus. I mean, it is an extremely expensive business, even with the new technology. New technology has made it cheaper, but it's also created other outlets that take away viewership. So without the eyeballs, we can't bring you any news. So if we leave the big story too much and do the deeper dives and people stop watching, are we putting our entire company in a bad position, our entire news gathering operation in a bad position? Or do we do one thing on cable and then another thing in the broadcast? Do we let the cable animal be the cable animal, which is just Donald Trump around the clock, what's happening right this moment, now, and then use our Dateline brand to dive deeper into a story, or use nightly news to take us away from politics to go in another direction. That's the balance I think we're striking at the moment. But, I mean, if you're going to talk to journalists, I would love to do deeper dives at 2 p.m. every day. I'd love to put Sarah Huckabee Sanders on hold for a day and do a really interesting deep dive into what it means what these tariffs mean for farm workers. Go talk to a farm worker. Have a farm worker on the air. I would love to do that. It's hard though, and the decision ultimately doesn't fall to someone like me. It's a decision that's made a lot higher up, not at the corporate level. I should just point out, at the news executive level.
Earlier today, we were in the Murrow room and we looked at some of Murrow's papers, and we were talking a little bit about are there any parallels we find between what Murrow did in covering Joseph McCarthy, a man who arguably was sort of mastering the new medium at the time, which was television, and what journalists have to do now in covering Donald Trump and dealing with social media, the newest of the communication vehicles. You see a parallel there?
Absolutely. I went back and I was reading the transcripts from the McCarthy broadcast, and it's brilliant in a lot of ways. One, he just let McCarthy speak for himself, and he basically gave him the rope to hang himself. But he pointed out something that Donald Trump does that McCarthy was doing back then, which was he was grilling somebody in one of the Senate hearings. It's a man who wrote a book that he said was communist. And he had a membership in the ACLU at one point, and Murrow said from the dais in the Senate, don't you know that the ACLU was officially labeled I forgot the term, but basically a communist sympathizer. And the man said, no, I had not heard that. And he said again, the ACLU, hadn't you heard the ACLU had been deemed this? And the man said, well, maybe I've read it somewhere, but I don't know. And Murrow stopped and he said, McCarthy did something very, very dangerous there. He didn't use those words, but he said something, notice what he did. The ACLU has never been labeled that, but he said it twice as if it was fact. Donald Trump does that. He says things as if they are fact all the time, and he repeats them over and over and over and over and over again. And if you don't trust journalists, and a lot of the country doesn't trust us right now, when we say that is not true, here's the evidence, here's why it's not true, Donald Trump can say whatever he wants. We could say, no, Pew Research says this, and Pew is independent, but someone who doesn't like the media will say, well, I don't know what Pew is. Pew, that's obviously run by a bunch of liberals. So I don't believe it. So Donald Trump has learned, and he knows this from his days in the real estate business and days of just manipulating the New York tabloids, if you say it enough, it is true. Jimmy Breslin would say he'd create a razzle-dazzle. McCarthy created a razzle-dazzle. Donald Trump creates a razzle-dazzle. Ultimately, what did McCarthy in was that people got tired of it. Really, they just got tired of it, and he started to seem crazy and unhinged, and sweaty, and his hair was askew on TV. At some point, listen, we're 3 years into this. Maybe at some point people will get tired of Trump, and it won't necessarily be that we suddenly find the one thing that we can, the fact that we find the moment Donald Trump's lying and we can show everybody and everyone will say, there's the moment Donald Trump's lying. It might just be an accumulation, and the voters will look and they'll say, I'm a little tired of this. I don't believe it any longer.
So many institutions are under fire. Journalism is one, all forms of government, the Justice Department, the United Nations. Many institutions are been vilified by the president, but the press being one of them. As a journalist, are there things you think journalists can do to rebuild that trust, or are there things that consumers need to do to help rebuild that trust?
I think it's both. I think journalists need to stick to their mission statement, which is holding power accountable, and being as down the line as they can be. But down the line is subjective in some ways, and it doesn't, down the line for Donald Trump doesn't look like down the line for Paul Ryan, because he's in the news today. Because Donald Trump says so many things that are just not true. So it'll look like, when the journalists are doing their job, it'll look like that journalists are out to get Donald Trump. So we need to try and back ourselves up as much as we possibly can with facts, with evidence. We need to take as much of the emotion out of it as we can. I think some things warrant some serious emotion when he really goes after journalists and he tries to endanger people. I think that warrants emotion. When he lies only for his advantage, I think sometimes it'll warrant some emotion, but to try to be emotionless about it. But a lot of the burden is on the public, and that is being critical about what you are told, being critical of your local politicians, being critical of your journalists as well. Get your news from more than one source. Don't just, I'd love it if you turn on MSNBC all day, but don't just get it from MSNBC. Read the New York Times, read the Washington Post, read your local paper, watch your local news, find out if your local news is Sinclair so you can look at it more critically. I'm serious. And really consider the information that you are being given. If you are well-read and well-informed, you can reason out the truth. It's your job to do it as well, and to also be critical of what you're seeing in your social media feeds. And if your friends are peddling a conspiracy theory or something that's wrong, talk to your friends and say, hey, listen, that's not right. Don't yell at them. Don't scream at them. Don't scream at them over social media. That's not effective, period. That's only making things worse. Try to have a conversation. Try to listen. And if we all find a set of facts that we can agree on, then we can lift ourselves up. But it's not just the responsibility of journalists.
In terms of social media, one thing which has changed since the days when I was out there doing this is the news clock now never stops. Right? You're not just racing to the next show. You can be on the air all the time. You can be communicating through social media, and people can communicate with you all the time. I was talking to Tom Brokaw the other day, who said this particular generation of NBC correspondents said, I think they're the best we've ever had. He said the group of people who covered the campaign were fantastic. He said, and not just because they're great reporters, because they are, but because all the things they had to do that I didn't have to do. Not just feed the beast of the Daily Show, of the morning show, but feed all media all the time and take in more content than I ever had to do and report at the same time. Is that part of the reason why it's just so grueling to do it?
Yeah, you're never off. You can go home, it's the weekend, and I can be engaged in a political conversation 24/7. At 4 a.m. I could wake up and most people are asleep, but I could start talking about politics with whoever's on my Twitter feed. Partially because the president's always making news around the clock, and partially because people just want to talk about it all the time. And people get a lot of their news from Twitter. There was a young man who I talked with earlier as I was signing books who said that he got the entire campaign through the Twitter handles of journalists, which is great. In some ways it's accessible, it's there, but it's very limiting. It's 140 characters. Was it you? It was you. I'm sorry. It's limiting. It's 140 characters. Yes, you get links. You get links to articles, and if you read those articles, great. But it can also be a bit of an echo chamber, because what I found hard about social media during the campaign is if one reporter decides something, then all of the other reporters decide it too, or they get into a battle with it. It feels very insular and a little bit out of touch with what a lot of the country is thinking and feeling. But you do have to take part in it to a degree, because that's also where some of the viewers are.
So if there are any people out in the audience who are listening to you and saying, that's what I want to do, I want to grow up and be Katy Tur one day, what should they do?
Oh gosh. Grow up and be a journalist, don't grow up and be Katy Tur. It's a great field. I can't imagine doing anything else. I can't imagine doing anything else. If they kicked me on my butt tomorrow, I have no idea what I would do, because I love this. It's exciting, it's different, it's new, it's important. It can be dangerous, which makes it exciting. I think if you want to be a journalist, you got to go out there and see the world, absorb it as much as you can, write all the time, be critical, find relationships, travel, do everything you can to learn about people and places. And then get an internship somewhere and make friends in the building. And then if you want to be a reporter, go to a local station and rise up through the ranks. Or if you want to be a political reporter, even better, get a job at a newspaper and only write about politics, or magazines or blogs and only write about politics, and get so good at politics and that beat you're on, and have the best sources and break stories that cable news puts you on television. and be so good at being on TV that you get to be a correspondent. That's if you want to be a TV correspondent. There's a lot of ways to break in now. It's not just you have to go through this editor or that editor or this station or that station. You have the ability to break news on your own. You can work for, there's so many outlets. I mean, if you want to work for ProPublica and do investigative journalism, that's there. Anything you want is at your fingertips. I love it. And if you can be a foreign correspondent, be a foreign correspondent. It's the best job in the entire world.
I don't want to stop this without talking about Me Too, which has sort of been a tsunami through the media world, and ask you what you think the impact will be going forward.
It's a really tough question. I think it's a good thing by and large. There's always been a bit of a old boys club culture to newsrooms. Part of the reason I got into news was I liked the bodiness of a newsroom. It was not a PC place. You could scream invective across a newsroom and everyone was swearing at each other. I liked that. I liked how the rough and tumble aspect of it. I still do. Because journalists we're not people with smooth edges. We're rough and we're broken and we're sad people. That being said, I was a little worried, just to be honest, I was a little worried that once the Me Too movement really swept over us, that we would revert and get a little too PC and a little too closed off. And there's definitely still fear of that. But surprisingly, I have really enjoyed nobody commenting on my looks at work. And I don't think it felt very overwhelming before, but now there's something different about it. And it's not that we've lost our bodiness. It's not that we've lost our ability to say things that you shouldn't say. It's just that I just feel more in control of my career and more in control of myself and my day. And I feel more confident and more at ease walking down the halls. There's just something about it that I think has really benefited women. And it's a very subtle wavelength. And a lot of men I talked to, I was having this conversation the other night with somebody at the FBI, a former director of a certain bureau of the FBI who, assistant director, not James Comey, God. Just want to put that out there, who was just gross with women, and reporters would say, like, I want this reporter to come, and I'm, just nasty. And my friend was saying that, there's so many things that we just would never say any longer. And looking back in that moment, it felt gross at the time, but like, whatever, this is how guys talk. But looking back, oh my God, how horrible. We would never do that now. And that was only just 2 years ago. I think it's made it easier just for female reporters to talk to sources as well. It's taken that off the table. That's nice.
And how do you think about that in terms of the allegations that have been made about the president, both his conduct, suits by women who've charged he acted inappropriately, right? And it seems that even after the two interviews with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, that the poll numbers didn't move.
No.
Is that because people have already made up their minds?
They've already made up their minds about who he is, period. This is not a different person than they voted for in 2016. They don't care about that. Or maybe they don't sympathize with the women involved. They just don't believe them. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter for those voters. But what he has done is he has created and inspired this movement. This movement probably would not happen if Donald Trump were not president. And a lot of folks will say that's a real silver lining from this. How it affects him going forward, that remains to be seen. When we talk about Donald Trump and his prospects and all of the ways in which he could lose or he could win, I think the women angle is the most interesting. A lot of the aspects that put him in office are still there. The ingredients in the soup, let's say that. People are still frustrated about the economy. They're still frustrated. They don't feel like they're being listened to. They still don't like the media. They don't like politicians. They feel like we need to put America first, et cetera. And also, the economy is doing better, and they could say Donald Trump hasn't tanked anything. My life feels like it's in the right moving in the right direction. So there are real ways that he could get reelected. But his margin of error is very small. So if enough people in enough key places, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, decide, hey, I'm done with this, moderate Republicans, swing Republicans, or if women decide to come out and say, hey, I'm not going to vote like my husband. Some women, like in suburbs of Philadelphia, where they say women vote like their husbands. I don't know if that's true. If they say, you know, I don't like the way he treats women, and or Democratic women are more invigorated by it and energized, then he stands a real chance of being slaughtered by the next Democratic candidate because of the way he treats women. And look at what's happened in Virginia. The women vote totally skyrocketed. What happened in Alabama with Roy Moore? He lost because of black women. Women are the voting bloc to watch.
So last question, then we're going to ask the audience to ask you some questions. But I want to go in our time machine. We're going to go ahead a couple years. You're now a newlywed. And a couple years from now, the call rings and they say to you, we're looking for people to staff the next presidential campaign. Katy, are you in?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. Why would you? I mean, if 2016 was crazy, 2020 stands to be even more insane. I mean, I can't even fathom what that looks like. I think there's going to be so many Democrats in the race. There's going to be Republicans challenging Donald Trump in the primary. Who knows what billionaires are going to come in and try to be crazier than Trump was. And who knows how Donald Trump will react to it all. I just think, wow. It's going to be wild.
I know one thing for sure. I know you're going to get that call. Let's see if we can have some questions from the audience. Microphones are in circulation here. Over here.
Hi, Miss. Hello. Hi, Miss Tur. My name is Erin. I believe we spoke before. I really enjoyed your talk today and really appreciate you coming out today. So I probably, like most of my classmates, spent most of yesterday procrastinating my homework by watching Mark Zuckerberg testify before the Senate, or maybe not like most of my classmates. And a lot of senators were very concerned, mostly those on the right side of the aisle, about Facebook's role in perpetuating news. And I wanted to know if, with the spread of fake news and other more biased news sources and misinformation, if you feel that companies like Facebook and other social media outlets are in part responsible for this spread and should be held liable, and whether or not you feel like NBC and any other corporations you worked with have had to alter the way that they communicate with the audiences because of social media.
Well, we definitely have to alter the way we communicate because of social media. We need to be on social media. I mean, it's certainly, and it's taken away a lot of our viewers, and it's also colored the opinions of others. So yeah, social media has definitely had an effect. I think the spread of fake news, I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying, yeah, Facebook and other social media helped spread that, certainly, to a much wider audience, and helped campaigns target voters, or any Cambridge Analytica, whatever, target voters with certain information to manipulate their votes. I don't know how effective that was, but it certainly did happen. Do they have a responsibility? Yes, I think so. I think we have a responsibility for what we put on the air, the ads we run on our network. Facebook should have a responsibility in the same way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Over here.
Hello, my name is Max Hirsch. I'm curious if you think that in the future, between the financial strain of sending news reporters on national primary campaigns and between the prevalence of social media, that reporters like you will get the opportunity to join campaigns as early as you did with the Trump campaign, or if it's even necessary for that to continue happening.
Oh, I think we're in it from the moment it starts. Yeah, definitely. The arc of history has moved campaigns. Campaigns have started earlier and earlier and earlier. So as soon as they start, we start along with them. So it used to be, what did it used to be, like a 6 months or a year on the road?
Yeah, 6 months to a year.
6 months to a year. Now it's at least a year and a half. It's just, I foresee that happening for as long as people are fascinated by politics. I mean, if we just get a boring slate of people in 3 years or 8 years or whatever, then maybe we'll calm it down a bit. But it depends on the appetite for the news and the race.
It's also, I think, the part that people want, the earlier they get in, the earlier they get covered. So this kind of chicken and egg thing, right? If you announce early, you get more attention. Whoever, and therefore, right, the more attention they get, the earlier they're likely to announce.
Well, there's that, and there's also, do you want that much attention so early on? So you have Democrats right now who I think there's a good portion of Democratic senators thinking that they've got a shot at the presidency, but they won't ever tell you that or publicly come out and say it because they don't want that target on their back. It's a weird calculus.
Other questions? Over here.
Hi, my name's Stephanie, and I read the book as well, and I thought it was wonderful. And I was wondering, because it was such a busy and crazy experience covering it, how you went about writing the book about your experience.
Oh gosh, writing the book. So the book, I started writing it in earnest in January of 2016. I had a day job, obviously. I still have a day job. I wrote every night. And every weekend, I was in my pajamas every weekend. My poor fiance, now husband, was like, "Can you put some clothes on? Can we go to dinner?" No, I'm sorry. I'm writing a book. He's like, "I thought this was supposed to be over after the campaign." It was just, put your head down and write as many words as you possibly can. And then hopefully it makes sense at the end. And if it doesn't, rely on your editor to help you make sense of it. But it was a slog from January to, I finished, it was done in August. It came out in September. It was a real sprint.
There's a question right here in the middle. There we go, here's a mic.
Thank you for taking me. Very inspirational story. And so I would like to know, you're the person who report news and current events, and you're the person also give comment to current events. How do you keep yourself informed, and what do you read on a daily basis?
Oh, good question.
And also, looking back in your career path, have you ever done anything that you feel like, oh, I wish I did it differently?
Differently, okay, yes. I read the Washington Post, the New York Times, Politico. There's an Axios newsletter I read every morning. There's a First Read newsletter. These are things you could do. First Read, NBC News, has a great newsletter that comes into your inbox around like 8:15 every morning. Gives you the day, how it's supposed to go, what's happening, what you should watch out for. Politico Playbook has one as well. It's a little longer. Axios, a little too short. And so I read those, I get an idea of what's happening, and then I go and I pick up I have it on my phone, the Times and the Washington Post. I usually click on the politics tab. I read all the politics stories that I can get a hold of. And then I really wish I read more than just politics. I go on Twitter, and I scroll through the feed, and a lot of the time there will be, I try to follow a variety of people, not just journalists, and stories will pop that I hadn't seen, and I'll try to give myself a more generalized perspective on the news. I also I really love reading Mother Jones and also the National Review. I like reading a variety of different opinions, the conservative columnists and the liberal columnists. I think it's really interesting to get both points of views on things. They're often very divergent, and a lot of the time lately, though, they're very similar. When you have Jennifer Rubin sounding like, I don't know, give me a liberal columnist, sounding like a liberal columnist, period. I mean, that's something else. She's very conservative. Just try to get a mixture. Certainly a mixture. Turn on Fox News, see what the president's being instructed.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Adam. Thank you both for being here. I'm curious your thoughts on the correspondence dinner, and there's been some debate over Trump sort of resetting an adversarial relationship with the press. And that maybe had gotten a little bit comfortable over the years. So I'm curious your thoughts on an event like that, where people kind of come together in a more friendly way.
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that. I mean, in some ways, The Correspondence Dinner raises a lot of money for journalism programs and for journalism students. So the point of the dinner is not for us to mingle with the president or for us to dress up fancy and feel glorious. It is to raise money. And they raise a lot of money. And they finance a lot of really important scholarships for journalists like you guys coming up. I can see, though, looking at it from the outside, how cozy and uncomfortable it looks. And I am a little uncomfortable with it. If you have the President of the United States, it doesn't matter who it is, Bush, Obama, Clinton, Trump, yucking it up with the correspondence. It makes you feel like, gosh, shouldn't you be, are you buddy-buddy behind the scenes? It's weird. But then I think, why can't you be cordial to someone behind the scenes after you report on them? Neal, what do you think?
I think it's a good example of how the show businessification of the world we live in. It was a time when it wasn't the big effect it became today, and soon became, who was going to get bigger guests, and then Hollywood stars started showing up, and it became a huge, and then corporations started putting in who are going to get to come, and it became a big competition. So that kind of troubles me. I do agree that it does raise a lot of money that does good. I also think it's too bad, really, that we live in a time where there's such anger on both sides that you can't, the Gridiron Dinner is a much smaller event, and the humor is much more gentle, and people kind of get it, right? It's not on TV, and so people come, they don't raise much money, but I feel more comfortable about that.
Yeah.
That's my view.
I think Donald Trump has forced the press to get more antagonistic towards the White House. They should be in an antagonistic role, period. Maybe they should have been more antagonistic for past presidents. I think you can argue the lead up to the Iraq War. People should have been a little bit more antagonistic than they were. So that's good. That's the only point I was going to make.
One more question we need to run. You're right here.
So you mentioned Sinclair in one of your a little while back. Can you talk about the obligation of journalists when there was that event when they were given that mandatory content to read at the affiliates, and what do you speak to the obligation of those journalists that all had to know they were reading something that wasn't right?
Yeah. Well, and this is a tough one. I'd like to think if I was in that position, I would get very sick on promo day. And I would find any reason not to say that. I understand that it's hard. When you are a local news reporter or anchor in a small market, those are very competitive jobs, and they are very hard to get. And when you lose one, it's hard to find another one. So if they refused and they were fired, 6 months, Sinclair could enforce a 6 months do not compete clause. So for 6 months, they are out of a job. Out of a job. I presume a lot of them have kids, mortgages, car payments, like to eat food they need to pay for. So that puts you in a really uncomfortable position, and you're not exactly in a position to say no. It's like having a gun to your head. That being said, it's very dangerous. It's obviously very dangerous. Sinclair fights back by saying, hey, listen, network news anchors have every word that they read reviewed. They've got opinions in their broadcast, and to which any sane journalist will counter, yes, of course, we have every word reviewed. They're reviewed by the other journalists. They're reviewed by executive producers. They're reviewed by standards and practices to find out if they're fair. They're reviewed by legal to make sure we're not libeling anybody. I mean, yeah, there's a process in place, but it's not like Comcast is reading our scripts and line editing them and saying, no, you can't have that, and you can't have that, and oh, I want you to be more friendly to this, and here's what our agenda is. And nobody is writing an editorial and putting it in our mouths. That does not happen. And it's happening at Sinclair, and it's happening in a really scary way, because you don't know which stations are Sinclair stations unless you're pretty savvy about it. A lot of these stations have peacocks. Oh, it's an NBC station. They've got eyes. Oh, it's a CBS station. Fox logo. It's a Fox station. That's not a Sinclair station. My local station's not owned by Sinclair. that might be true, but they own, like, what is it, 40% of the local stations across the
More,
country?
it's going to be up to 60%.
It's going to be 70% if this goes through the FCC, if this plan to buy more stations, the Tribune stations goes through. So, I mean, I think the way that the journalists that had to take part in it are fighting back is by becoming, unfortunately, a lot of them becoming anonymous sources for other reporters to push back on it. So we are trying to fight the fight for them. I would caution against making them into the enemy, because put yourself in their shoes.
You know, I've never been in, there are two situations I'd never been in, but I hope I could find the strength. If I were a news director for Sinclair, I hope I would say no. And if I were covering Donald Trump and he singled me out, I'd hope I'd be brave and strong like Katy Tur. Katy, thank you very much for joining us.